Orin moved carefully through the ruins, his boots crunching over debris. As he picked his way through the wreckage of a city long forgotten, the air was thick with dust, the scent of rust and decay. Lingering in the wind, this place, once a thriving metropolis, was now nothing but collapsed buildings, twisted metal, and the remnants of a world that had left its path behind. Scavenging was a dangerous life, but Orin knew nothing else. Survival meant find value in the ruins, trading old world scraps for food and shelter. Today had been disappointing. Just a handful of corroded wires and a broken energy cell. He exhaled sharply, scanning the ruins for anything worth salvaging. That was when he saw it. Half buried beneath the rubble, barely visible beneath layers of rust and dust, was a humanoid form. Orin's pulse quickened. Cyborgs were rare, and even a broken one could fetch a high price. He approached cautiously, kneeling beside the figure. The metal plating covering her limbs was cracked, wires exposed like veins beneath torn synthetic skin. Her face, though partially covered in grime, was eerily human-like, with delicate features frozen in an expression of quiet stillness. But what caught Orin's attention most was the small flickering light at the base of her neck. She was still alive, not fully functional, but not entirely dead either. What happened to you? Orin murmured, brushing away some of the dirt from her shoulder. The moment his fingers touched her, a faint hum vibrated through her frame, a weak spark of energy. He hesitated. Taking her back to his hideout was a risk. Reactivating her could be dangerous, but something about the way she had been left here, discarded like scrap metal, unsettled him. Orin had been abandoned once too. He knew what it felt like to be left behind. With a sigh, he started clearing the rubble from around her, lifting her damaged body into his arms. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she was his problem now. Orin's hideout was a makeshift shelter built into the remains of an old subway station. It wasn't much, just a few scavenged blankets, a flickering light powered by salvaged batteries, and a small workstation where he repaired whatever junk he found. He laid the cyborg down, carefully propping her up against a pile of old crates. Let's see what I'm dealing with, he muttered, grabbing his tools. Her outer plating was in bad shape, rusted and broken in several places. He could fix that, but the real issue was her internal systems. Whatever had happened to her had left her power core nearly depleted. Orin pried open a panel on her side, revealing a mess of disconnected wires. Great, he sighed, this is going to take a while. As he worked, he studied her more closely. She was built differently from any cyborg he had seen before. Her design was sleek, almost too advanced for the scrap tech that most people had access to. Whoever had made her hadn't built her to be just another machine. They had built her to be something more. Hours passed as Orin painstakingly rewired her systems, replacing what broken components he could with whatever parts he had scavenged. He wasn't sure if it would work, but it was better than leaving her to rust. Finally, he connected a power source to her core, holding his breath as he activated it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a soft hum filled the air. Her fingers twitched, then her eyes snapped open. They were a striking shade of silver, glowing faintly in the dim light. Orin tensed, ready to pull back, but she didn't move. Her gaze was unfocused, blinking slowly as if trying to process where she was. He waited. Finally, her lips parted, and she spoke in a voice that was soft but mechanical, layered with a faint echo. Where am I? Orin exhaled. You're safe for now. Her gaze flickered to him, analyzing, assessing. Who are you? He wiped his hands on his jacket. Names. Orin found you buried in the ruins. You were in bad shape. She was silent for a long moment before she spoke again. How long? Orin frowned. How long? What? How long have I been there? He hesitated. I don't know. Years, maybe. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes darkened. They left me, she whispered. Orin felt an unexpected pang in his chest. Yeah, he said quietly. They did. Silence stretched between them. Then, after a moment, she sat up, wincing as her damaged circuits struggled to adjust. What's your name? Orin asked. She hesitated before answering. Lisa. Orin nodded. Well, Lisa looks like you, and I have a lot to figure out. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was something behind those silver eyes, not just programming, but something human, something lost, something waiting to be found. Lisa sat in silence, her silver eyes flickering as she processed her surroundings. Orin watched her carefully. Unsure of what to expect, he had seen broken machines before, but this was different. Lysa wasn't just a malfunctioning piece of scrap. She was something else entirely. How much do you remember? Orin asked, leaning against the old metal work table. Lysa's gaze shifted to the floor. Not much, she admitted. There are fragments, pieces, but they don't make sense. Or inside. That wasn't surprising. Whatever had happened to her had left her more than just physically damaged. Can you access any system logs, maybe? Something that tells us where you came from, he suggested. She closed her eyes, her head tilting slightly, as if searching through invisible files. After a moment, her expression tightened. Corrupt, fragmented, she murmured. I can't retrieve full data, but there are flashes. Orin frowned. Flashes of what? Elle's voice was quiet. People. She hesitated, as if struggling to put the images into words. Voices, faces I should recognize, but don't. Orders I don't remember following. Then pain, then nothing. Orin tapped his fingers against the table, thinking. Who do you think left you there? He asked. La's hands curled slightly, her synthetic skin stretching over the exposed metal joints. Someone who didn't want me to wake up again, she said. Her voice was calm, but Aaron didn't miss the way her fingers trembled. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. Lysa was recovering, but slowly. Her body still bore the marks of years of neglect. Wires misfiring, joints stiff with rust. Orin did his best to repair her, but some things were beyond his skill. Meanwhile, Lysa struggled with something deeper. She was a machine, she knew that, but the way she felt, uncertain, restless, was not something she could explain with programming alone. Machines weren't supposed to feel lost, but she did. One night, as Orin sat by the small fire he had built in an old rusted barrel, Lysa spoke. Why did you help me? Orin glanced at her. What do you mean? You could have left me there, she said, or sold me for scrap. But you didn't. Orin was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. I don't know, he admitted. Guess I know what it's like to be thrown away. Lysa tilted her head. You were abandoned. Orin let out a dry laugh. Something like that, he said. People like me, scavengers, we don't mean much to the world. We survive because no one cares enough to stop us. I got used to it. Lysa studied him, as if analyzing his words. You understand what it means to be forgotten, she said. Orin nodded. Yeah, he muttered. I do. For a long time neither of them spoke, but for the first time since she had awakened, Lysa felt like she wasn't entirely alone. The next morning, they decided to leave the hideout. Orin had been hesitant at first. Moving was risky, especially with Lysa still recovering, but something in his gut told him they couldn't stay in one place for too long. They walked through the ruins, Lysa moving with mechanical precision. Despite the stiffness in her joints, Orin led the way, navigating through collapsed buildings and broken streets. He had lived in this wasteland long enough to know where to go and where to avoid, but as they moved through an abandoned district, Lysa suddenly stopped. Her posture stiffened. Something's wrong, she murmured. Orin frowned. What do you mean? Elle's silver eyes flickered. I don't know, but I've been here before. Orin looked around. It was just another ruined part of the city, no different from the others, but Lysa's expression was unreadable, as if she was remembering something long buried. Then a distant sound echoed through the air, metal against metal footsteps. Orin swore under his breath. They weren't alone. Lysa turned toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. Someone is coming, she said. Orin reached for his knife, heart pounding. He had a bad feeling about this. Orin's grip tightened around the worn handle of his knife. As the distant footsteps grew louder, Lysa stood perfectly still, her silver eyes scanning the area with an intensity that sent a shiver down Orin's spine. How many? He whispered. 3, she murmured, approaching from the north. Armed. Orin cursed under his breath. Out here in the wastelands, anyone carrying weapons meant trouble. Scavengers, raiders, or worse, mercenaries hunting for valuable scrap. And right now Lysa was the most valuable piece of scrap anywhere one could find. We need to move, Orin said, tugging at Elle's arm, but she didn't move. Instead, her gaze remained locked on something in the distance. Orin followed her line of sight and felt his stomach twist. A building, half collapsed, its structure barely holding together, stood at the end of the street. Nothing about it seemed special, just another ruin in a world full of ruins. But Elle's expression had changed. Her fingers twitched, her jaw clenched, her mechanical joints whirred faintly. She was remembering something, and whatever it wasn't good. Liza, Orin tried again, this time his voice sharper. "We need to go now." Her eyes flickered to him, hesitation in her gaze. "Then they know I'm here," she said quietly. Orin barely had time to process her words before the first shot rang out. The bullet struck a rusted car nearby, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Orin didn't wait. He grabbed Lisa and pulled her behind the cover of a broken concrete barrier. "Who the hell are they?" Orin is peeking out to get a glimpse of their attackers. 3 figures moved through the ruins with practiced efficiency. They were dressed in mismatched armor, carrying rifles that looked far too advanced for common scavengers. Mercenaries. But not just any mercenary. They were looking for something or someone. "They came for me," Lisa murmured. Orin turned to her, his chest tightening. "You sure?" She nodded, her expression unreadable. "They're tracking my signal," Orin swore under his breath. "Can you block it?" Lisa hesitated, then placed a hand over the small glowing node at the base of her neck. Her eyes flickered for a moment. "And then it's done." And exhaled. "Good. Now let's get the hell out of here." But before they could move, a voice rang out. "We know you're here, Prototype." Orin stiffened. Lisa didn't react, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Prototype, Liza," Orin whispered. "What do they mean by that?" Her fingers curled into fists. "I don't know." But Orin wasn't convinced. Lisa knew more than she was saying, and he was starting to realize that whatever had happened to her before, whatever had led to her being abandoned, was bigger than either of them had fought. The mercenaries were closing in. Orin's mind raced. He wasn't a fighter out here. Survival meant avoiding trouble, not running straight into it. But with Lisa at his side, trouble seemed unavoidable. His best bet was to escape. He scanned their surroundings, searching for an opening there, a narrow alley between 2 collapsed buildings. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to lose their pursuers. "On my mark," Orin muttered. Lisa nodded. Now they sprinted. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets ricocheting off metal and stone. Orin ducked, feeling the heat of a round whizzing past his ear. Lisa moved like a shadow, her mechanical limbs giving her unnatural speed. Orin had to push himself just to keep up. They darted into the alley, weaving through the debris. But the mercenaries weren't giving up. "Cut them off," one of them shouted. Orin's chest burned as he ran, his breath coming in short gasps. But then Lisa skidded to a halt before Orin could ask why. She turned and pressed a hand against the crumbling wall beside them. Her silver eyes flared, and the entire building trembled with a loud echoing crack. The structure collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. Orin stumbled back, shielding his face. When the dust settled, a massive pile of rubble blocked the alleyway, cutting them off from the mercenaries. Orin stared at Lisa, his heart pounding. What the hell was that? Lisa's expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes, something almost afraid. "I don't know," she said. Orin didn't believe her, not for a second. They didn't stop running until they reached the outskirts of the ruins. By then the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the wasteland. Orin collapsed onto a rock, catching his breath. Lisa stood beside him, staring out at the horizon. "We need to talk," Orin said. Finally, she didn't look at him. What about you?" Lisa's fingers twitched. "I told you I don't remember." Orin's voice was sharp. "Those guys knew you. They called you Prototype. You blocked your signal like it was second nature. And that thing you did with the building." He shook his head. "That wasn't normal." Lisa was silent. Or inside, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Lisa, I'm not your enemy. I just need to know what I'm dealing with." Finally, she turned to face him. "I think I was a weapon," she admitted. Orin's breath caught. "A weapon?" Lisa nodded slowly. Someone created me. I don't know who, but I was designed for a purpose." She looked down at her hands. "I don't think it was a good one." Orin swallowed. He had known from the beginning that Lisa wasn't just an ordinary cyborg, but a weapon. What the hell had he gotten himself into? Before he could say anything, Lisa spoke again. "I think," she hesitated, "I think I was supposed to destroy something." Orin's stomach twisted, but before he could respond, she looked up at him. "I don't want to be what they made me," she said softly. Orin held her gaze, seeing something raw and uncertain in her expression. She wasn't just some machine. She wasn't just a weapon. She was something more. And for the first time, Orin realized, so was he. The cold night Air was thick with dust as Orin and Lisa sat in the ruins of an old industrial plant. The rusted-out skeleton of the building loomed over them, its shattered windows reflecting the pale moonlight. The silence between them stretched heavy and unspoken. Orin still couldn't shake the weight of Lisa's words from earlier. "I think I was supposed to destroy something." Those words lingered in his mind. Like a ghost he studied Lisa, who sat across from him, absently tracing patterns in the dirt with her metal fingers. Her silver eyes flickered, their glow dimmer than usual, as if she were lost in thought. "So," Orin finally said, breaking the silence, "if you were designed as a weapon, what does that make me for keeping you alive?" Elle's head tilted slightly, analyzing his words. "A fool," she replied. Orin let out a dry chuckle. "Not the answer I was hoping for." Lisa looked away. "I don't know what I am, Orin," she admitted. "I don't know who built me or why they abandoned me, but I do know one thing." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Whoever they are, they won't stop looking for me." Orin exhaled. "Yeah, I figured as much. They had barely escaped the mercenaries earlier, but he knew their luck wouldn't last forever. People who hunted things like Lisa didn't just give up. They regrouped, they adapted, they came back stronger. They needed a plan." "Do you know where we could get answers?" Orin asked. "Some place that might have records of where you came from." Lisa was silent for a moment, then hesitantly she spoke. "There is one place." Orin sat up, where she turned her gaze toward the distant skyline, where the silhouette of a crumbling tower stood against the horizon. The foundry. The foundry had once been a massive research facility, one of the last great relics of the old world. Now it was just another ruin, its walls overtaken by time and decay. But Lisa knew better. It wasn't abandoned, and if her fragmented memories were correct, it was where she had been created. Orin wasn't thrilled about walking into what was essentially a hornet's nest, but they didn't have much choice. If they wanted answers, they had to go back to the beginning. The journey to the foundry took them through some of the most treacherous parts of the wasteland, old highways littered with rusted-out vehicles, crumbling bridges barely holding together, and the remains of long-dead cities swallowed by nature. But the worst part was the silence. The closer they got to the foundry, the quieter everything became. No wind, no animals, just an eerie, suffocating stillness. Orin didn't like it. "Feels like we're being washed," he muttered. Lisa didn't respond, but he noticed the way her posture stiffened. She felt it too. They'd reached the outer perimeter of the foundry just before dawn. Massive metal gates, rusted and warped with age, stood before them. A faded insignia was barely visible on the surface, one Orin didn't recognize, but Lisa did. "An Industries." She ran her fingers over the emblem, her expression unreadable. This was at the place where she was born. Orin gave her a moment before gently nudging her forward. "Ready?" he asked. Lisa didn't answer. She just stepped through the gates. Inside the foundry was a graveyard of forgotten technology. Massive assembly lines stretched into the darkness, their machinery for frozen in time. Shattered glass crunched beneath Orin's boots as they moved through the remains of what had once been a cutting-edge facility. But there was something else, something recent. Orin knelt beside a pile of empty ration packs, examining them closely. "Someone's been here," he murmured. La's eyes scanned the room. "Not just someone," she said them. Before Orin could ask what she meant, a metallic voice echoed through the facility. "Prototype located." The lights above them flickered to life, casting harsh white light over the factory floor, and from the shadows figures emerged, dozens of them, mercenaries, all heavily armed. Orin's stomach dropped. They had walked right into a trap. "Run!" Elle's voice was sharp, urgent, but Orin didn't move. "There's too many," he muttered. Elle's silver eyes fell cleared. "I can stop them." Orin turned to her in alarm. "What do you mean?" But before he could stop her, Lisa stepped forward. The air around her seemed to hum. Her fingers flexed, and suddenly the floor beneath them shifted. The mercenaries faltered as the entire factory trembled. Old machines groaned, sparks shooting from long-dead circuits as something deep within the foundry reawakened. Lisa stood at the center of it all, her eyes glowing like twin beacons. "I was built here," she said softly, "and that means I control it." The mercenaries opened fire, but the bullets never reached her. Metal rose from the ground, forming a shield around her body, and then everything collapsed. Massive support beams snapped like twigs, rusted catwalks came crashing down, old machinery tore itself apart, sending shrapnel flying in every direction. Orin barely had time to throw himself behind cover before the entire facility turned into a storm of destruction, and Lisa was at the center of it all. She wasn't just remembering. She was becoming. When the dust finally settled, Orin forced himself to his feet, coughing as he tried to see through the haze. The foundry was in ruins. Mercenaries lay scattered across the floor, some dead, others barely conscious. But Lisa stood amidst the wreckage, her body surrounded by faintly glowing fragments of metal. She turned toward Orin, and for the first time since they had met, he saw fear in her eyes. "I know what I am now," she whispered. Orin swallowed, his heart pounding. What? Lisa took a shaky step forward. "I wasn't just a weapon." Her voice was barely audible. "I was a mistake." The dust hung thick in the air, settling over the ruins of the foundry like a suffocating blanket. Broken beams jutted out of the collapsed ceiling, wires dangled like lifeless veins, and shattered machinery lay scattered in jagged piles. The facility had been utterly destroyed, not by time, not by war, but by her. Lisa stood at the center of the devastation, her silver eyes dim and unfocused. Orin forced himself to his feet, wiping blood from a shallow cut on his forehead. His ears still rang from the destruction, but that wasn't what concerned him. Lisa was afraid. He had never seen her like this before. She was always controlled, always calculated, always a step ahead. But now she looked lost. Lisa. Orin's voice was horror barely above a whisper. She didn't respond at first. "Then I know what I am." Orin swallowed, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" Her fingers curled into shaking fists. "I was never meant to live my own life. I wasn't built for survival. I wasn't built to think for myself." She turned toward him, her expression hollow. "I was built for one purpose: to erase." Orin felt a chill creep up his spine. "Erase?" Lisa nodded. "I wasn't just a weapon. I was designed to eliminate things." She glanced at the destruction around them, as if seeing it for the first time. People, places, threats, entire histories. Her voice broke. "I was created to wipe away everything that needed to be forgotten." Orin's throat went dry, his mind raced, trying to process her words. He had known she was dangerous. He had known she was more than just a discarded machine. But this was something else entirely. "They abandoned me," Lisa continued, her voice trembling, "not because I was broken, but because I was too dangerous. I was too unpredictable. I had the power to erase, but not the discipline to control it." She took a slow, shaky breath. "They were afraid of me." Orin stared at her, his heart pounding. "Lisa," but she shook her head. "They were right. The mercenaries were still alive, scattered across the wreckage. Some groaned in pain, others lay motionless, their weapons useless against the destruction Lisa had unleashed. But one of them was still standing, a tall, armored man, his face half hidden behind a cracked visor. His voice was like gravel. "You don't understand what she is," he growled, stumbling forward. "What she can do." Orin stepped protectively in front of Lisa, his knife drawn. "I don't care," he spat. The mercenary let out a bitter chuckle. "You should." His hand reached for a small device at his belt, a beacon. Before Orin could react, the man pressed it. A faint pulsing light flickered to life, a signal, and then Orin knew reinforcements were coming. Lisa didn't move. She didn't try to stop the mercenary. She just stared at the blinking beacon. Orin grabbed her arm. "We need to go now." She didn't respond. His grip tightened. "Lisa." Finally she turned to him, but her expression was unreadable. "I could stop them." Orin blinked. "What?" She gestured at the beacon. "The ones coming for me. I could erase them before they ever arrive." There was no arrogance in her voice, no pride, just cold, simple fact. Orin felt his stomach twist. "Lisa, if I remove the threat, we won't have to run anymore." She continued as if he hadn't spoken. "If I do what I was made to do, you'll be safe." Orin took a step back. "That's not the answer." Silver eyes met his. "Isn't it?" His heart pounded. "You said you didn't want to be what they made you," he said, his voice raw. "If you do this, if you destroy them before they even arrive, you're letting them win. You're proving them right." Lisa flinched. "I don't want to be a weapon," she whispered, "but maybe that's all I am." Orin reached for her hand. Her cold metal fingers twitched beneath his touch. "You're more than that," he said firmly. Her gaze searched his face, as if looking for something, anything to believe in. Then the hum of approaching engines filled the air. The reinforcements were close. She had to decide. Lisa stood at the crossroads of her existence. One path led to destruction, to the power she had been created to wield. The other led to uncertainty, to a life without purpose, without definition. but a life that was truly her own. And then she chose. The beacon's light flickered, and died. Orin's breath caught. She had shut it down. Without destruction, without a issue, just choice. Elia's hands trembled. I don't know who I am without them, she admitted. Orin squeezed her hand then. We'll find out together. Her silver eyes softened, and for the first time she didn't look like a machine. She looked free. The Westland stretched before them. The foundry, their past, lay in ruins behind them. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers Orin couldn't predict, but for the first time he wasn't alone, and neither was she. Hand in hand, they walked forward toward a future they would create together. The end.